AI is transforming customer service. It's real and it works. And with Finn, we've built the #1 AI agent for customer service. We're seeing lots of cases where it's solving up to 90% of real queries for real businesses. This includes the real-world complex stuff like issuing a refund or cancelling an order. And we also see it when Finn goes up against competitors. It's top of all the performance benchmarks, top of the G2 leaderboard, and if you're not happy, we'll refund you up to $1 million, which I think says it all. Check it out for yourself at fin.ai.
Ready for the best summer ever? ID Tech is the original and most trusted tech camp for kids, ages 7 to 17, offering over 50 epic courses like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with take-home bots, AI and machine learning, and more. Camps are all about high-energy fun, new friends, trusted instructors, and exclusive tech partnerships. Experience ID Tech at 75 college campuses nationwide. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
Have you ever been stuck on a weight loss plateau, trying everything and anything you can to lose that extra weight and reach peak health? We've all been there, but Noom's unlocked the secret to reaching the mountaintop. Go in micro. The Noom GLP-1 microdose program starts at $99 and is delivered to your door in 7 days. Start your microdose GLP-1 journey today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Noom. Micro changes, big results. Noom GLP-1 RX program involves healthy diet, exercise, and support. Individual results may vary. Meds and personalization based on clinical need. Not reviewed by FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality. No affiliation with Novo Nordisk Inc., the only U.S. source of FDA-approved semaglutide. Not available in all 50 U.S. states.
Ready for the best summer ever? ID Tech is the original and most trusted tech camp for kids, ages 7 to 17, offering over 50 epic courses like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with take-home bots, AI and machine learning, and more. Camps are all about high-energy fun, new friends, trusted instructors, and exclusive tech partnerships. Experience ID Tech at 75 college campuses nationwide. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
Have you ever been stuck on a weight loss plateau, trying everything and anything you can to lose that extra weight and reach peak health? We've all been there, but Noom's unlocked the secret to reaching the mountaintop. Go in micro. The Noom GLP-1 microdose program starts at $99 and is delivered to your door in 7 days. Start your microdose GLP-1 journey today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Noom. Micro changes, big results. Noom GLP-1 RX program involves healthy diet, exercise, and support. Individual results may vary. Meds and personalization based on clinical need. Not reviewed by FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality. No affiliation with Novo Nordisk Inc., the only U.S. source of FDA-approved semaglutide. Not available in all 50 U.S. states.
Hello, I'm Sarah, and welcome to the Whispering Woods After Dark. I've got a very interesting story today, all about a curse. I'll get straight into it. Are you ready for the story? It began as many of these stories do, with a warning. Before a single frame had been filmed, before the cameras were even set up, a conversation took place that would later take on a very different meaning. Producer Harvey Bernhard would recall it years later. He'd been speaking with a religious advisor about the project, an upcoming film centred on the Antichrist, a child marked by the number 666, hidden in plain sight within an ordinary family. The advisor listened, then told him, plainly, "If you make this film, something will happen to you." Bernard did not take it seriously. at least not at the time. The film itself was called The Omen, released in 1976. It would go on to become one of the most recognisable horror films of its time, following the story of a young boy named Damien, unknowingly adopted by an American diplomat, and gradually revealed to be something far more dangerous. The idea was simple, but effective. Evil, not as something distant or grotesque, but something hidden. Quiet, patient, waiting. The project had not always carried that title. During development, it moved through several working names. The Antichrist, Birthmark, before settling on The Omen, a title that suggested something less direct, but far more unsettling. Filming officially began on the 6th of October, 1975. The production was based primarily at Shepperton Studios in England, with additional location work taking place across southern England, as well as in Rome and Jerusalem. It was a relatively standard shoot, around 11 weeks in total. No different on paper from dozens of other productions taking place at the same time. But almost immediately, something began to feel off. Not dramatically, not in ways that would stop production, just a series of moments, small at first, unsettling enough to be remembered. Bernard would later describe wearing a cross during filming, not as a prop, not as part of the production, but for himself, a Coptic cross given to him for protection. At the time, it may have seemed like a precaution, or perhaps just a private reassurance. But later, after everything that followed, that detail would be revisited again and again. Because what came next would become the foundation of one of the most persistent cursed film stories in modern cinema. Not because of one event, but because of several, some documented, some remembered, some difficult to fully verify. And over time, those events would begin to align, not as isolated incidents, but as a pattern. A plane crash, a series of bombings, an animal attack, unexplained incidents during flights, near misses, close calls, moments where something seemed to go wrong, just narrowly enough to avoid disaster, at least for some. The question that followed was not whether these events happened. In several cases, they did. The question was whether they were connected, or whether, once the idea had taken hold, everything that happened afterwards was simply interpreted through it. Because once a film introduces the idea of signs, of warnings, of events that appear random but are not, it becomes very easy to start seeing them. And The Omen did something else as well, something deliberate. Its release was carefully timed. In the United Kingdom, early screenings were staged on the 6th of June 1976, the 6th day of the 6th month. The number 666 had already been woven into the story. Now it was part of the marketing, printed and displayed, repeated. It was no longer just a detail within the film. It had become part of how the film was experienced. And from that moment on, everything surrounding the production began to feel as though it belonged to the same story. Of all events later linked to The Omen, one truly stands apart. Because it can be traced, it's documented, reconstructed in detail. On the 20th of November 1975, right in the middle of the film's production schedule, a small jet took off from Dunsfold Aerodrome in Surrey. It was a Hawker Siddeley HS-125. A routine test flight, nothing unusual about it. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft flew into a flock of birds, large ones. They were lapwings. Both engines ingested them, and power dropped almost immediately. The pilots attempted to recover, to bring the aircraft back down safely, but they didn't have the altitude or the time. The plane overran the runway. It didn't stop at the edge. It continued forward, crossed a main road, and collided with a passing car. Everyone in that car was killed, all 6 occupants. The sequence of events is not disputed. It appears in official accident reports and government records. Investigations that outline exactly what happened, step by step. There is no ambiguity in the mechanics of it. A bird strike, engine failure, loss of control, and then impact. What is less clear is how it became connected to the film. In later retellings, the story shifts slightly. The aircraft is described as being linked to the production, sometimes as a plane that had been booked, sometimes as one that had been intended for use, but replaced at the last moment. In those versions, the implication is obvious, that the disaster was narrowly avoided, that the wrong people boarded the wrong flight, that something intervened. But there is no surviving production document that confirms that link directly. No memo tying that specific aircraft to the film. What can be said, with certainty, is this. The crash happened during the exact window that filming was taking place, in the same region, under ordinary circumstances. And it unfolded in a way that feels structured, a chain of events that moves cleanly from cause to consequence, but with an outcome that feels disproportionate. A plane fails, and instead of crashing into open ground, it crosses a road and strikes a car. It's a kind of detail that stays with people, the kind that invites interpretation, because it doesn't just feel like an accident. It feels like something narrowly redirected. Whether that impression is meaningful or simply human, it's harder to say. But once that event became associated with the production, even loosely, it set a tone. Because this wasn't a rumour, it wasn't a story passed between crew members, it was real. And that made everything that followed much easier to believe. During the autumn of 1975, while the Omen was filming in and around London, the city was not calm. There was a background tension that had nothing to do with the film. A series of bombings linked to the Troubles had placed parts of London on edge. Attacks were not constant, but they were frequent enough to create a sense of unpredictability. On the 5th of September, a bomb exploded at the London Hilton on Park Lane. 2 people were killed, dozens were injured. In October, another device detonated near Green Park Underground Station. In November, 2 separate bombings targeted restaurants, one in Mayfair, another in Chelsea. Each attack added to the same pattern: public spaces, ordinary locations, sudden violence. All of this was happening in the same weeks that the film's cast and crew were moving through the city, travelling between locations, staying in hotels, working within an environment that at the time carried a very real level of risk. Later accounts from those involved in the production describe a series of near misses, moments where plans shifted, reservations changed, journeys were delayed. Stories of being scheduled to visit a location, only for that location to be targeted shortly after. Of staying in hotels that would later become part of the timeline of attacks. Of passing through areas that, days later, would be described very differently in the news. These details are difficult to verify precisely. Not because the events themselves are unclear, the bombings are well documented, but because the personal connections rely on memory, recollections given years later. There are no surviving records that place a specific crew member at a specific restaurant on a specific day. No documentation that confirms a booking that was cancelled at the last minute. But the broader context is not in doubt. The production was taking place in a city where these events were occurring in real time. And that context matters because it shapes how those experiences would later be understood. At the time, these incidents would have been seen for what they were, part of a wider situation unrelated to the film. But when viewed later, alongside other events, they began to take on a different quality, not as isolated occurrences, but as moments that seemed to cluster. A sense that the production was moving through a series of spaces just before something happened. Whether that reflects genuine proximity or the way memory organises itself around significant events is difficult to separate, but the effect is the same. Because once those stories are placed alongside the plane crash and the other incidents that follow, they begin to feel connected. One of the most memorable scenes in The Omen does not involve anything supernatural at all, at least not on the surface. It takes place at a safari park, a family outing. It should have been controlled, safe, predictable. In the scene, a group of baboons surround a car. At first they seem curious, then agitated, then suddenly violently aggressive, climbing over the vehicle and shaking it, screaming. It's one of the film's most effective moments, because it doesn't rely on anything unseen. The danger is immediate, physical, real, and in front of you. And that matters, because the animals used in that scene were real. The behaviour, while directed, was not entirely artificial. Handlers were present, precautions were taken, but there was always an element of unpredictability. Accounts from the production describe genuine difficulty during filming. The animals did not respond consistently. At times they became distressed. At times difficult to control. In one widely repeated detail, the baboons reacted strongly to one of the actors, becoming unusually agitated in his presence, refusing to settle. That alone might not be unusual. Animal behaviour can shift quickly, especially in unfamiliar surroundings. But what followed is where the story changes. Shortly after filming at the safari park, reports began to circulate of a fatal incident. A keeper, killed by a tiger. This was not a rumour. Contemporary references indicate that such an incident was being discussed at the time. It appeared in print, mentioned as a recent event. What is less certain is the connection to the film. In later interviews, producer Harvey Bernhard would state that the death occurred the day after the baboon sequence was filmed, that the trainer involved with the animals had been killed, suddenly and violently. It's a detail that appears again and again in retellings, presented as a continuation of events, as though one moment led directly into the next. But there is no surviving production record that confirms the exact timing. What can be said is this: the production was active during that period, the location is consistent, and a fatal attack involving a tiger at a safari park was being reported at the time. The rest relies on recollection. And memory, especially years later, has a way of tightening events, pulling them closer together, arranging them into sequence. But even with that uncertainty, the effect of the story remains, because it introduces something different. Until this point, the events surrounding the production could be explained as external: a crash, a bombing, situations that happened around the film. This was closer, something tied to the production itself, to the set, to the work being carried out. It suggested that whatever was happening was not just surrounding the film, it was beginning to touch it directly. As filming continued on The Omen, the incidents being remembered began to shift. Less public and less documented, but more direct. They involved travel, flights taken by members of the cast and crew, journeys between locations, routine movements that under normal circumstances would not have been remembered at all. Years later, producer Harvey Bernhard describes several of these moments, not as isolated problems, but as a series of events that began to feel connected. In one account, a plane carrying actor Gregory Peck was reportedly struck by lightning. The aircraft continued its journey. There was no crash and no immediate disaster. In another, screenwriter David Seltzer was said to have been on a separate flight that was also struck. Again, the plane landed safely. Individually, these incidents are not extraordinary. Aircraft are occasionally struck by lightning. Modern designs allow for that. Flights continue, passengers arrive. But what unsettled those involved was not the event itself, it was the repetition. The sense that the same thing was happening more than once. Bernard would later describe additional problems, mechanical issues, reports of fires on aircrafts, moments where flights did not proceed as expected. One account describes an emergency landing, a flight carrying film materials forced down during a transatlantic journey. The details are less clear, the documentation is limited, but the memory of it remains, not as a dramatic disaster, but as another moment where something had gone wrong, something that could have been much worse, and that became a reoccurring theme. Not a catastrophe and not direct harm, but interruption, interference and close calls. The kind of events that, on their own, would be dismissed. But when placed alongside everything else, they begin to feel different, because by this point, the idea had already taken hold, that something did not want this film to be made. And by this stage, the pattern had become difficult to ignore, because the events were no longer happening at a distance, they were happening to the people making the film. As the idea of a curse around the Omen began to take form, it did not remain confined to the production itself. It extended outward, attaching itself to the people involved. The most frequently mentioned is Gregory Peck. By the time he took on the role, Peck was already an established and respected actor. His presence gave the film a level of credibility that set it apart from other horror releases of the time. But around the period leading into the film's production, Peck experienced a personal tragedy. His son Jonathan died in 1975. The details are often included in discussions of the curse, positioned at the beginning of the timeline, as though it marks the start of something. In reality, it was a private loss, one that occurred before the film's release, and while the timing places it near the production, there is no evidence that connects it to events on set. Even so, once the idea of a curse is introduced, events like this are rarely left separate. They're drawn in, placed alongside everything else. Other cast members also mentioned Lee Remick, who played Damien's mother, would later be diagnosed with cancer and died in 1991. This too is sometimes included in retellings, despite the clear medical context, despite the time gap between filming and her illness. Director Richard Donner consistently rejected the idea of a curse. In interviews, he described the events as coincidence, the kind of incidents that can occur on any production. And yet, even those statements often become part of the narrative because they introduce another element: doubt, a tension between what is believed and what can be explained. Behind the scenes, the story is shaped largely by the people who spoke about it later. Producer Harvey Bernhard, in particular, played a significant role in how the events were remembered. His accounts are detailed and specific, and delivered with a sense of unease that remained long after filming had ended. This is important because the curse is not built on anonymous stories. It's built, at least in part, on recollections from identifiable individuals, people who were directly involved. But memory is not fixed. It changes, it compresses, it finds patterns. And when those patterns align with themes of the film itself, they do become difficult to separate. Over time, the story grows, not through invention but through selection. Certain events are remembered, others are not, and gradually a narrative forms, not just about what happened during the making of the film, but about what it meant. By the time The Omen was ready for release, the film already carried a certain atmosphere, not just because of its subject matter, but because of the way it was being presented. The number 666 had always been central to the story, a mark, a sign, something hidden in plain sight. But during the film's release, that detail moved beyond the screen. It became part of the experience itself. Posters emphasized it. Advertisements repeated it. It was no longer just a narrative device, it was a message. In the United States, early previews followed a similar pattern, strategically timed, carefully positioned, designed to build anticipation. This was not unusual for the time. Other films had begun to experiment with wider, more immersive marketing. But in this case, the theme itself lent weight to the approach, because the film was about signs, patterns, and warnings. And once that framework is introduced, it becomes easier to see those things outside of the story as well. Around this time, the events connected to the production began to circulate more widely. Stories of the plane crash, the animal incident, the flights, and the near misses. Not necessarily as a single narrative at first, but as fragments, details shared in interviews and recorded in conversation. And gradually they began to align. What had been separate incidents became linked. What had been coincidence began to feel deliberate. There is some suggestion that this shift was encouraged, that the story of a curse was recognised as something that would draw attention, that it fit the tone of the film too well to ignore. And it spread. It began to shape how the film itself was remembered, not just as a successful horror release, but as something surrounded by events that felt connected. Even those who rejected the idea contributed to it, by addressing it or by responding to it, by trying to explain it. Because every explanation kept the story alive, and over time it became part of the film's identity, not something separate from it, but something that belonged to it. By the time the story of a curse had fully taken shape around the Omen, the events themselves had not changed. The plane crash had still happened. The bombings in London had still taken place. The animal attack had still been reported. The flights, the near misses, the moments recalled by those involved, those remained exactly as they were. What had changed was how they were understood. Placed side by side, the events begin to form a sequence. Not a perfect one, not without gaps, but close enough that the mind begins to connect them. A production about the Antichrist, a timeline marked by accidents, threats, and close calls, a release built around a number already associated with warning and meaning. Individually, each element can be explained. A bird strike, a period of political violence, the unpredictability of working with animals, the realities of travel. None of these require anything beyond ordinary explanation, but taken together, they create something else, a pattern. And once a pattern is seen, it becomes difficult to unsee. There is a well-understood tendency to look for meaning in events that feel uncertain or out of control, to link separate incidents, to arrange them into something that makes sense. A film production is by its nature unpredictable. Schedules shift, conditions change, and unexpected things happen. When those things occur within a story already built around the idea of hidden meaning, they take on a different shape. Not because they are different, but because they are being viewed differently. And yet, that explanation does not remove the unease, because even when each individual event can be accounted for, the timing still matters. The overlap, the proximity, the way certain details seem to fall into place. It leaves a question. Not whether the events happened, they did, but whether they were ever truly separate, or whether once placed together, they form something that feels intentional. Because the idea at its centre is a simple one, that sometimes events do not just happen, sometimes they appear to arrange themselves. And when they do this, it becomes very difficult not to ask why.
ID Tech is more than just the original and most trusted tech camp for kids ages 7 to 17. ID Tech is where kids find their people. The engineering and creating people. The fire-breathing, shell-spinning BattleBots people. The just as happy building games as they are playing them people. ID Tech offers over 50 epic courses, like Camp Crunch Labs IRL, BattleBots with Take-Home Bots, and more at 75 college campuses across the country. Visit idtech.com and use code IDTech to save $150 on a week that's guaranteed to be the highlight of your kid's summer.
Spring weekends are all about family, sunshine, and evenings on the patio. Before the barbecue starts, I like to stop by my local Total Wine & More to pick up a great bourbon, maybe a single barrel I already love, or something new to try with dinner. With so many bottles to choose from, it's easy to discover a favorite or something new for everyone to enjoy. And knowing that you're getting the lowest prices makes it easy to grab an extra bottle for friends and family. If you're not sure what to pick, their friendly guides can help point you in the right direction. Find what you love and love what you find, only at Total Wine & More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly. B21.
I really want to watch the Omen again now. All of them. Is it 3? I can't remember. I haven't actually watched them for years. The first one I think I have more recently, a few years ago. But the others, and I don't know if I'm misremembering, but I'm sure it's the third one, where, it might be the second one, they're just in a snowy place. That's the one I want to watch. There's some kind of Christmas jumpers going on. Maybe that should be my Christmas movie this year. I'm terrible. I get the family around and I choose the Christmas movie. And it's never really a Christmas movie. But if it's got a Christmas tree in it, or a Christmas jumper, that's what we're watching. One year it was Prisoners. I know, what a thing to make everybody watch, but we enjoyed it. And just really not into all this. You know, I'm glad when it's that way. Anyway, what am I moaning about Christmas for? You know, we're just into April. I'll leave that till later. There's plenty of time for that. I hope everyone's doing okay out there. Big hug, as always. And I will catch you again on Tuesday. Take care, everyone.
business is booming. But you know what really helped? Xero, the accounting platform for small businesses. I used to think spreadsheets were just part of it. Ugh. But real-time cash flow? Wow. Invoices that chase themselves? Even better. Books that automate? That's a big one. And I can keep track from my phone while I get the job done. No spreadsheet in sight. What a life. Do right by yourself and your business and search XERO for your free trial. Conditions apply.
Youth mental health is a complex challenge that requires comprehensive solutions. We must strengthen after-school programs. We must make digital literacy tools available in our schools. We must work with mental health professionals to support children. And we must empower mentors, educators, and parents to keep kids happy. Learn more about our commitment to finding lasting solutions at empowerourfuturecoalition.com/solutions. Paid for by the Coalition to Empower Our Future.
The old adage goes, it isn't what you say, it's how you say it. Because to truly make an impact, you need to set an example. You need to take the lead. You need to adapt to whatever comes your way. And when you're that driven, you drive an equally determined vehicle, the Range Rover Sport. Blending power, poise, and performance, it was designed to make an impact. With a dynamic drive, refined comfort, and innovations like cabin air purification and active noise cancellation, the Range Rover Sport is built to be as uncompromising as you. Explore Range Rover Sport at rangerover.com/US/sport.
The stories told on the Whispering Woods are inspired by historical records, witness reports, and local folklore. While every effort is made to research and represent events accurately, some details, names, and locations may differ from official accounts or have been changed out of respect for those involved. These episodes are created for storytelling and entertainment purposes and should not be considered definitive fact or investigative journalism.